that seems like a long and weird title, so I'll just kind of go into a little bit of what my role is. I kind of take care of the full, kind of go-to-market strategy across sales and marketing in our partner ecosystem to kind of really help ensure, that we have the right motions in place um, and we're resourced properly across the business for the ERP portfolio. Today, I'm joined by Jamal Malik. He's the CEO of Sales Advantage, and I'll let them go into some brief introductions in a second. Mary Thompson, who will be joining us shortly, who's the sales lead at a system integrator called Bamboom Cloud. They specialize in Business Central. And then Marty Murray, who is a director at Protiviti, and they're a management consulting company. And so I think from an agenda standpoint, what we'll do is I'll just kind of, I'll let Jamal and Marty maybe just provide some brief introductions, then I'll take it over and continue with the intro. And then from there, what will happen is that Jamal will kind of talk to you a little bit more about the industry trends and kind of some of the market research that we've been able to muster up. And we have a pretty interesting way of thinking about it. And so from an industry perspective on how we've derived those market insights, Jamal has an amazing AI tool that really enables us to go and kind of research, organize like education institutions and understand what their problem statements are. And what we found is pretty alarming in terms of the similarities, in terms of what the challenges that are being faced today across all institutions. And we have I think a unique way of thinking about how technology can help, with some of those problem statements. And so that's what we'll kind of dig into a little bit more. So maybe with that, before I get into it, I'll pass it on to Jamal just to give a quick introduction.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Nadeem. Yeah, so Nadeem basically said it all. I am the founding member and managing partner for Sales Advantage. We focus on market research and hosting, organizing industry events. Marty?
Yeah, thanks, Jamal. So as Nadeem mentioned, I'm a director with Protiviti. I'm based in Toronto. So Protiviti is a global consulting firm. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Robert Half International, the global staffing firm, which finance and accounting folks will probably be very familiar with. We have 4 core practice areas: internal audit, risk and compliance, technology consulting, and business performance improvement. BPI is the group that I lead here in Canada. We also partner very closely with Microsoft. We are a Microsoft Gold certified partner, and happy to be here to join this discussion on Canadian higher education trends and finance. And as Nadeem mentioned, we will be joined by Mary Thompson. We'll be jumping in a little bit later to walk us through some great use cases. But I will hand it back over to Jamal to jump into our research.
Yep, thank you so much, Marty. I think if we can go to the next slide. Nadeem, before I get into the research, do you want to just talk about this project and provide some context in terms of how we arrived at doing this research to begin with?
Yeah. So, when we looked, as we were thinking about, some of our go-to-market strategies and looking at, how, obviously we all know today, like there's not one industry that's not being impacted by, I guess, the digital transformation. I know that's a very broad word, but like this new kind of era that we're in, I'll just say, right? Like with modern technology, cloud-based technology, and quite honestly, one of the areas that we found that probably had a large, I would say, on-prem or legacy install base, and I think we've been having a lot of discussions with is the education industry all up. Right. And so the way we think about it is that, there's a lot of, given the history and kind of obviously, the long tenure of these organizations, from a technology standpoint, there's a lot of work to do to modernize environments to give people the right experience. And so what we did was we handpicked, I guess, 33 organizations today that we saw had a large base of, on-prem software, legacy software. And we wanted to get some more insight as to kind of what are some of the areas and challenges and pain points that they're facing. And so per that 33 organizations, what we did was, as I was mentioning, through this machine learning tool that Jamal has created, we were able to derive some really interesting insights about, what your organizations are facing. And the interesting thing, they were all very common and similar in terms of what are some of the pain points and what are some of your goals and things that you're trying, that your organizations want to drive into the next, into the next year, and how you're thinking about modernizing some of your processes to ensure that you have you maximize efficiencies within your organization and empower your employees and give your students ultimately the best experience that they can. And so that's really kind of the essence of how we, kind of started with this project, and why, for me personally, obviously, I went to University of Toronto in the Scarborough campus, and if anyone's been to that campus now, you see it's transformed. They had one building, and now they have 15, I think, and so they've grown immensely over the last 15 years. And I know going to school at that time and now understanding with the capabilities that schools could have, I only wish that I was able to kind of experience some of that. But I think it's really important, as we partner, between the education institutions and technology providers, that we partner together really to ensure that we're giving not only the students the best experience, but also, empower the professors and the employees to make sure that they have the right tools to deliver the best experience for those students as well, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the reason why, and kind of how we came about this project, and why we're here today.
Perfect. Thank you, Nadeem. And as we go to the next slide here, what I'd like to do is just take a second and maybe talk a little bit about the overall goals and the research that we actually did and found. Marty, can we go to the next slide? Okay, perfect. All right. And so, as Nadeem mentioned earlier, the research that we performed primarily was based off of the shareholder letters, the annual reports that a lot of these universities have produced, and we were able to kind of hone in on 5 key elements around all the business strategies of all these universities. Number 1 is we looked at their primary goals, which I'll talk more about here in just a moment. We'll talk about the investments that a lot of these universities are making to achieve their goals. We'll talk about the outcomes they're trying to achieve through their investments. And then lastly, we'll talk about the main trends that we found that are common across all these universities. And so let's just start with the goals. One of the more interesting things that we found around all the different goals that all these universities had in common, which I'll talk about here in just a second at a high level, really culminates with a focus. And I'll read, if I could, just a number of these specific ones first. So, for example, we found some of the goals around strengthening our international partnerships with other great universities by facilitating student mobility, faculty exchanges, as well as joint initiatives in research and conferences and teaching. Things like developing new innovative curriculum and non-curricular activities that enhance the student's experience, embracing the demand for job-ready graduates, building strong foundations for lives of people, harnessing the transformative power of education, deepening the relationships with local partners, and heightening our contributions to the success of GTA as one of the most diverse and dynamic metropolitan regions, the Greater Toronto Area as one of the most dynamic metropolitan regions. So all of these are the primary goals that we found for these universities. And the one thing they all had similar was that at the end of the day, every single one of the universities want to deliver high quality services. Okay, that's ultimately the goal of all the universities that we saw across this research. Now, as we move to the next item here, Marty, if you want to go to the next slide, let's talk about the investments that these universities are making to achieve this goal. And so there are 3 primary investments that all these universities are making. Now, at this point, one thing I want to kind of just call out here, if at any point, if anybody has a question, wants to dive deeper, happy to do that. You can simply hit the hand button at the very top, or type in a comment, and we're happy to kind of field them as we kind of walk through all of these elements. But let me take a second and maybe kind of get back to the investment objectives. So the first investment objective that we're going to find here is enhancing the student experience. Colleges, universities, everybody today has an opportunity to make the student experience at their local campuses differentiated, more personable, more focused. There are many pain points that we'll talk about that kind of prevent a lot of these institutions doing that, but that is one major investment that we're seeing. The second major investment we're seeing is around pursuing academic excellence. And really it's about delivering the highest quality of product, or if you will, or education services to the colleges, to the students, but also to provide the right facilities and the right services to the professors, the teachers, the faculty, and the staff as well. And then the last investment objective that I'll talk about really quickly is around advancing institutional stability. Now, there's a lot this actually consists of, but the primary element we're going to talk about here is really optimizing internal processes, making sure that financially the universities and colleges are building long-term sustainability into their plans, that they're balancing their budgets, that they're able to actually forecast and understand both tuition, budget, expenses, things of that nature. Now, the one caveat I'll put on here, which I think should relate to everybody who's on this call, is asking the question, what does finance or finance teams have to do with these investment objectives? And what's interesting is that every single one of these investment objectives actually have a tie back to finance. We'll dig into those more specifically, as we kind of go through the presentation here. Let's go to the next slide, Marty, and talk about some of the outcomes that we're trying to drive through these investments. Okay. So there's four primary investments that the four primary outcomes that all universities are trying to drive as part of their outcomes. Okay. And the main thing that I'll kind of just point out here, actually, and we have a question. Oh, Francisco, we have a question. Would you like to come off mute and ask your
Absolutely. Question? Yeah, pertaining to your last slide, when it came down to talking about, investing in the student experience, I imagine that's something, that maybe relates to like student life and other types of ways to sort of enrich, what that's sort of like. Is that correct?
That's correct. And actually, let's don't have to go back a slide. Let's talk about that, right? So okay. Enriching the student experience consists of many different aspects. The one thing that we're seeing the most of is actually investing in mental health, right? Extracurricular activities, like you were saying, both in terms of like, what you can do athletically, but then also, how can we provide services to students to make sure they're living a healthy, involved life on campus. That is something that we're seeing quite a bit of as well. And you're 100% right.
For sure. And that's what I guess the follow up or to clarify what I was going to say is I'm not sure if there's anything that alludes to, knowing that, we're still under the pandemic and, a lot of intramural and all these types of services have sort of, changed, what that student life experience was previously. Is there any indication or does this presentation cover anything in regards to how finances have maybe been reallocated towards, supplementary type of programming and what institutions have maybe done to, during this time to kind of still satisfy that, that pillar?
100%. And I think, we're not going to talk about the allocation of budgets. Rather, I think we're going to talk about the delivery of services and building new capabilities that enhance or in some way, improve the overall experience of those students. And absolutely, we're going to cover that as part of the themes as we get into this.
Awesome. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you bet, Francisco. Okay. Any other questions at all before we move forward? Great question, Francisco, by the way. All right, cool. Well, so if not, let me take a second and again talk about the specific outcomes that we're looking to drive as part of the investments within the universities and what they're trying to do as part of these objectives as well. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about before I even talk about the outcomes is that there are four types of outcomes. Not that there's four here, but within each four, there's four outcomes in general. Number one, there's observable outcomes, measurable outcomes, quantifiable outcomes, and then financial outcomes. Not every outcome that the universities are making have to be financial in nature. the thing I think is funny is that a lot of people I think get a lot of universities get a bad rap. I think in terms of kind of the nature of their business, and at the end of the day, are they trying to create a profit? They are a business at the end of the day, and yes, they have shareholders, and there's private universities and public universities. But the reason why I kind of talk about those four observable, measurable, quantifiable, and financial outcomes is because you can apply them across all these four outcomes I'm going to talk about here in just a second. So let's talk about the first one, about improving student-focused learning environment. And exactly, Francisco, you kind of hit the nail on the head. So what kind of outcome is it? Is it observable? Is it measurable? Is it quantifiable? Or is it financial? So this specific outcome is actually measurable and quantifiable, meaning that you can gauge both the terms of the experience of a student through obviously doing surveys and things of that nature, but you can also quantify them by some harder metrics. For example, how many times have students taken advantage of either certain services that are offered? How many times have we seen incidents happen on campus? Things like that. This is absolutely a measure that universities are trying to move the needle on, right? So overall, building and improving the student focus in the learning environment. The next piece we'll talk about is improving staff engagement and retention. I don't think it's any secret, right, that universities and colleges today are really struggling to not only create an environment that helps their staff, both the faculty, the professors, everybody involved, to be more productive, to be more connected, but also to bring in kind of this new blood, right? This fresh energy to help, fill the shoes of a lot of the aging staff that have been, in these roles for 10, 20, 30 years. Okay, this is absolutely something that that a lot of universities and colleges are trying to move the needle on. The next piece I'll talk about is improving business continuity and risk management. Again, no surprise here. A lot of colleges, a lot of universities, a lot of their processes are based on manual paperwork, on manual processes. Okay, and a lot of those manual processes, not to say they're wrong or they're not being done correctly, but they're prone to mistakes. They're not going to be as fast as a more let's say automated or electronic based system. And so we're going to talk about that, and that absolutely is both quantifiable and has a financial benefit as well, which we'll talk through. And then the last piece that we're also seeing as an outcome is increasing the number of services and offerings that are provided. Now, this spans both in terms of the curriculum that's offered, but then also, again, coming back to Francisco's point, what kind of services can we offer around mental health, around campus services? How can we help you connect with the right people and social engagement and things of that nature? Okay. Any questions about the comment? Any questions about the outcomes at all before I move into the trends? Does this make sense? Am I missing anything at all? Is this what you guys are seeing as well? Brian, yes, sir.
Hey, I got to come off double secret mute here. Good to see you again, Jamal.
Good to see you, Brian.
So I was a CTO at an R1 university here for a few years, and we used to talk about the outcomes a little bit differently. This is sort of more of it has sort of a business feel to it, but from your comment on, sometimes academic institutions get a bad rap. We would talk about our mission in sort of four particular areas. One is obviously teaching and learning, right? So we talk about that as a primary one. That's the student-focused learning environment, and also obviously the big move to online teaching right now, and then also programs to get back on campus. As a research university, as a public research university, research is one of our big goals, right? So that's working with funding agencies and things like that. We didn't talk as much about, staff engagement and retention. That was really part of the job description for faculty, is to go out and do research, and sort of covers a couple of these areas. And then our third area was outreach, and in that we had things like of course, athletics, but like our university managed a clinical network. We had a couple hospital partnerships, so healthcare in the community, running 4-H clubs for the state, but sort of those three buckets there. And I guess to your point, it's not necessarily many of those are not quantifiable type outcomes. They are going to be quality type outcomes, and realizing that the university gets a large chunk of their money from the state or the organization or the government entity that they belong to, and then you get fees and tuitions on the other side, and potentially athletic revenue or dorms or things like that to do certain parts of the business. But I would say that the finances internal to the university to support those three missions, it's pretty blended, right? So a lot of times we don't have the same laser focus that maybe a business would have on a particular product. Here's the quantitative outcome we want to have there in terms of revenue. But just wanted to sort of add that color, having been in the chair of the person that this is sort of aimed at. Although we dealt with finance, they were a different group, but it is interesting to sort of see some of the terminology they use and how qualitative those outcomes can be.
Yeah, and I think just to complement or kind of add to your topics, the topic you brought about, we have these three buckets, and this is how we kind of measure success and measure maybe outcomes. Observable and measurable outcomes are just as important. I think what universities have to do is drop a balance between, hey, there's these quantitative and qualitative ways we look at measuring success. Student satisfaction, faculty satisfaction, things like that. What is the quality of what is the number of jobs our students are able to get? But at the same time, if you're funded by the state, you have to meet certain specific quantitative
Yes.
metrics as well. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And so yeah, it's a very fine line to walk. And sometimes one metric actually might conflict with another metric. And so you got to figure out, like, okay, well, which one do I value more? Or, if I do here, what's the give and take? And that's often a conversation that I know that happens a lot, and it's not the easiest discussion to have. Very cool. Thank you, Brian, for that. Appreciate your commentary there.
Yeah, thanks, Jamal.
So yeah, you bet. If there's nothing else on the outcomes piece, I'd love to now kind of segue into the trends. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the, okay, here we go. So we kind of led the discussion by saying, hey, look, you have all these goals, all these investments that are being made by these institutions, use the outcomes they're trying to drive. What does finance have to do with all this? And what's crazy is that I think every single one of these trends, finance plays a huge role here. And the first one we're going to talk about is developing a compliance and business continuity framework. Now, the thing that I want to, kind of set this up, or I think maybe more importantly, I don't want to take away too much thunder here from the team that's going to talk about this in greater detail, is just kind of talk about the overall pain point. Okay, what we found here is that in order for these financial organizations to provide like best practices around reporting activities, a focus on compliance and accuracy, things like timelines around projects, things like that. There is a big push to revitalize the policies and update the procedures accordingly through implementing technology to help meet this need. Now, what I'm going to do here is, before I bottom out to all three of these, is pass it on to, let's see, we have, I think it's going to be Marty here. And what Marty's going to do is he's going to tell a story around this theme and dive into the pain a little bit more, get into what this basically consists of, and come back up and talk about how D365 can help kind of meet this need. Marty?
Yeah, thanks, Jamal. So as we think about this, again, this particular finance theme, and developing a compliance and business continuity framework. We've got Sasha up on the screen here, and Sasha's a finance manager at the University of Microsoft. So you can see Sasha is facing some common issues that are typically involved with legacy on-premise systems, inefficient paper-based processes, and so a lot of expenses that obviously go into running a school across the board, and an accounting department that needs 4 people to keep up with entering invoices, checking for errors, keeping up with approvals, getting the invoices paid on a timely basis. So it's an expensive process, right? And it's inexpensive because, again, this is mainly getting driven by a lot of paper, and then hence more people to be able to manage this process, and of course the risk of human error. So if we look at the traditional process around paying an invoice, which as you look across whether it be a university or a corporation or a not-for-profit, the process looks pretty much the same, right? So you're manually keying those invoices into a system. That invoice gets emailed to different departments for approvals. It's got to be coded. We need an appropriate GL account. Sometimes that will sit on someone's desk for approval. In some cases, if invoice receipt is not centralized, you might have invoices sitting on a buyer's table and not even reaching finance in a timely manner, which causes risk around accruing expenses. And then, of course, needing several hours once those invoices get in to compute the reports, check against your budget. So the pain points are pretty obvious. And if you're in finance and you've got a process that looks like this, typically what you're going to feel is that process is obviously not efficient. It's going to be very prone to errors. There's lack of control and lack of continuity in the process. And compliance and workflow development becomes very difficult, right? So again, if we think about that case of an invoice that has, let's say I'm a buyer or I'm a professor in a department, and I go out and buy, several textbooks that I need to do or to do some research. An invoice comes directly to me and sits on my desk for weeks on end, misses a month-end cycle. Now, I've got an invoice sitting out there, an expense that hasn't been paid, that hasn't hit my balance sheet, that I don't even have in my system that I can accrue for. There are all kinds of implications there around material misstatement, particularly if you take that one professor and you multiply it by the thousands of folks that work and purchase within a university. So again, pretty traditional process and pretty traditional pain points in terms of what a finance person could be facing, or someone who's processing invoices in a university. So when we think about the approach and using the Microsoft Dynamics and the other pieces that come into the Microsoft ecosystem to help build that business continuity and again, a compliant process. This is not just about efficiency. It's about how do we build a well-controlled process that we're able to track and monitor in an automated way, right? So we think about AI Builder, using that to help process invoices. So whether those invoices are received by paper or through email, we can build an application, an AI Builder to generate some OCR, grab some key points off of that invoice, input it into our financial system. We've got Power Automate, which will help drive our approval workflows. So depending on which department that invoice needs to go to, we're able to get Power Automate to send it through a workflow, through the multiple approval levels, through the delegation of authority that you might have in the university. So we can build that workflow in Power Automate and again, help track those approvals, and again, create that good audit log so that if we have to go back and look at a particular invoice, an auditor needs to come in and look at how an invoice has been tracking through the system, we can do that. And then Power BI. So create and easily review financials and profit analysis and budgets, right? So as that information gets into our financial system in a timely manner, in a well-controlled manner, we're able to pull out that information and do things like spend reporting, Look at category management. So, you know, where are we spending? Are we maximizing our discounts with vendors? Are there opportunities to consolidate vendors? And then, of course, how are we tracking against budget? So again, great budget control there, ability to track on a timely, well-controlled basis, and significant time savings, right? So we're eliminating steps here that will require someone to manually input an invoice, manually send it through a workflow, manually chase up people to code things and approve things. And then we've got an ability to automate our reporting and get the information we need to drive decisions. So again, thinking about building that good business continuity and compliance framework, you know, we're able to do that through the Microsoft ecosystem, and again, create not only an automated and efficient process, but a well-controlled one.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Marty. I think, you know, just to kind of summarize, at least in my mind, the whole point around improving business continuity and risk management is done by, you know, empowering the organization to support things like strategic planning, you know, solve for those difficult problems, and, you know, really improving the student experience through like end-to-end solutions. And I think that's really key here, because we're not just talking about like process automation, but we're talking about reporting. There's obviously collaboration. There's a lot that goes into building that capability. And I think the last piece that really just, you know, hits home with me is, you know, business process improvement, you know, really does, it does require the right tools, the right foundation, and really, at the end of the day, looking at connecting all the disparate, you know, siloed systems and parts that, you know, you kind of need to access in terms of data to kind of build those insights. And I think the next piece here kind of leads really well to the second theme. Marty, if you want to go to the next slide here, is around specifically implementing a comprehensive digital strategy focused on interactive, you know, student services. And, you know, the thing that I'll kind of tee up here is that the main problem that we are seeing is that, as I mentioned earlier, information is captured and it's often duplicated across a number of different platforms, right? Application silos and other systems that really prevent colleges and universities to share, to integrate, and really extract, you know, those insights that are needed to inform and guide the decisions that the universities make to improve the experience, you know, for their students. And so, for here, I'm going to actually ask Mary, Marty, if you can go to the next slide, to tell another story now about, I believe it's Jason, who's the president of the University of Microsoft, and kind of walk us a day in the life, you know, for Jason, and really kind of bring home, you know, and making this real for us. Mary?
Yeah, thanks, Jamal. So like Jamal mentioned, a lot of times in a university, you're going to have, in many different types of organizations, you're going to have this process of duplicated data information, or, you know, duplicated processing. And so Jason, for example, right, he's the president of the University of Microsoft, and he needs to be able to have an insight to all these different, you know, corporations, all these different departments across the university. And so if the admin department is putting in some information, but maybe a different college needs that same information on that student, they're probably having to ask the student, you know, maybe multiple times, or having to request that information from different departments. And when you have information or student information that's siloed, you're also going to have to be doing a lot of really manually created reports, a lot of Excel gymnastics, because maybe they're in different systems, right? So maybe one department is using a different, a different data source. And so you're going to have to combine the different things to be able to get your reports at the end of the month. And what that leads is that means Jason is having to do a whole lot of fire drills at the end of the month, because he's having to painfully put together these reports, right, from different systems, and it's really slow and it's inaccurate. And anytime that you're having to rely on the human to do a bunch of work, it's going to increase your likelihood for errors, and it makes it really easy to go ahead and get burnt out. However, if we move to the next slide, we can talk about how wonderful the Microsoft ecosystem can make this experience. So what it does is it really streamlines the approach. You can see Jason's even really excited now. He's cheering. But what it does is when you have Microsoft Dynamics 365 and the rest of the ecosystem, you're having all of your data stored in one centralized place. So instead of having to go out to these different systems and kind of essentially like knock on doors, open them up, jump in, get the data, and come back out, you're really fishing from the same pond. And so when you're pulling your reports, they're all coming from the same place. And so it's a lot easier. And because you're not having to do a bunch of manipulation, because it's all stored in the same place, you're saving a lot more time. But most importantly as well, you know that the data is going to be right. You're not having to translate it, which allows for human error there. So at the end of the month, Jason can actually report not only at the end of the month, but basically at any given point in time, where does my university stand at? Where am I, what department is making more money? Where do we have funds at? Where don't we? You're not having to do all of the work. It's already always going to be together because you've got one nice unified data. And what's also really great, especially in today's age and post-COVID, as everything's moved online, you're going to have secure financial, information as well, right? Because you're being protected by by your security packs, essentially within the Office 365 experience as well. So as you can see, you have the old way, or you can use the Microsoft ecosystem, and it really makes that management process for universities and higher education a lot more efficient. And I always like to work smarter, not harder. So we can give that life to Jason here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. And I think for me, the thing that really kind of stands out here is that you wouldn't think that data, just data, right? Access to data can have so much value or add so much value to students and helping university achieve their outcomes. And again, I think what's really impressive to me is just that we're not talking about just one platform. We're talking about multitude, like an entire ecosystem of reporting, the ability to connect that data in the back end, and really shifting the organization from like reactive processes to more proactive processes, right? Embedding insights wherever you possibly can, right? As part of managing the day-to-day business and kind of the operations, for these schools, universities. Again, I think at the end of the day, it really does help enable these education institutions to take preventative measures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And reduce the occurrences of issues or small mistakes that kind of have ultimately a really big impact in the long run.
Or like you said, it's also a great way to be able to really capitalize on some opportunities as well. Brian was mentioning that maybe the sports team may be covering a lot more expenses for other departments, but you may see a demand across another area that you wouldn't normally expect or see. Like you kind of have maybe something like these sleeper experiences or stars, right? That you didn't know that you could be tracking, or maybe there's a huge funding area that you weren't aware of, but whenever you have everything all kind of together and you have things tagged, all of a sudden you're like, where is this data coming from? This is such an anomaly. I never knew, right? And so you can kind of just dive right on in there because everything's all in the same area. And it's like I say, like numbers don't lie, right? They just kind of repeat themselves over and over again. So there's some great stories to be found when you have all your data together.
Yep. Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. I think, Marty, if you want to go to the next slide, let's kind of take it home with the last piece around, enhancing the student experience. And I think the piece that we really want to kind of focus in on now is talking about the staff members. Okay. We know that a lot of the staff members are looking for insights. They want to use modern tools, right? They want to access information and do what they're supposed to do remotely, okay? All that stuff sounds pretty crazy, for a lot of colleges and universities, but that's the way the world is moving. And I think a lot of the aging infrastructure and kind of the legacy tools that unfortunately a lot of universities and colleges use, prevent the staff from providing those high quality services to students, and really I think serving the needs of these institutions. And so, Mary, I'd love for you to maybe kind of talk through a scenario here from the point of view of maybe a professor, right, a faculty member that is in charge of providing these services to students.
Yeah.
Marty, can you go to the next slide here? And
yeah, and Jamal, I'm actually going to challenge that concept a little bit, because we have talked a lot about like what does this experience look like for like an administrative part. But ironically, when you have the Microsoft ecosystem and Dynamics 365 in your university, your students can also experience a better quality of life while at school as well, right? So let's talk about John and how that looks for him. And it's funny that you wouldn't think that maybe technology or just having an administrative, infrastructure built of a higher technology platform would matter to students, but it does. And to kind of digress just a second, like I think that if you look at the younger generations, like nobody's going to the bank anymore. Okay, everyone's taking their phones and they're making their deposits via electronic pictures, basically. So think of that in like a school scenario too, right? Like kids aren't going to use banks that don't have online banking because it's too difficult to get to. I'm not going to apply to a school or be a part of a school that doesn't have a nice, administrative functionality that allows me to use tech, right? So John, for example, he's new to the school. He got a scholarship. He's got to get some things cleared out so that he can get his register paid. Otherwise, he may lose his housing deposit, right? So he's got this scenario here. It's very common. I got to get my bill paid so I don't lose my classes and I don't lose my housing. Now, traditionally, you're probably going to have to maybe print off some forms, go to school, go to different departments, and literally like take your piece of paper from one department to another department. So you have to go show the registrar, right, that the tuition department said you paid, and go through all of that. It's super confusing. You may not know where all the different places, and it's just really slow, right? And you have to prove, hey, this person over here said this, and you're playing telephone, and it's really long and annoying, and you're probably just going to go home and not sign up for classes, right? And then mom and dad aren't going to be happy when you fail. They're not going to pay, and long story short, if you do this, student tuition or your admission rate's going to go down. No, just kidding. But let's go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about how Microsoft and Dynamics can make this better for John. So we talked about data being stored in one central place. So in reality, if everything's together, John's not having to go through these fire drills and tell the tuition department that to go tell the registrar that the billing department got your scholarship and everything's cleared out, right? Because your scholarship's going to hit, or you're going to have a applied to date and it's going to show a certain date, and then the finance department's going to say, yes, today on Wednesday the funds aren't there, but the system tells me that the funds are going to be here on Friday. Therefore, John does not have to go through any fire drills, right? Everything's lined up, and it's nice and it's easy, and it's taking that stress load off the students. I went to several different schools before I finally graduated, and I can't tell you how many times I ran through this scenario. And it's super stressful. Like, I'm here to do school and figure out my classes and do my homework and learn all this extra stuff now that I'm at university, and having this additional stress load, that's a whole lot. So if you can just go to school and it's easy and you don't have to worry about that, then that makes it so much better for your student life. And if they say, hey, I go to school and everything's taken care of and it's nice and easy, right? I'm not having to run through that. Then I'm going to tell my friends, and that's going to be a better college experience for John. And it's really going to also drive up that, that retention rate, right? And that recruitment rate as well. So that's a nice plus. And then also one thing that I really want to point out that's really great for your students is that Microsoft has a huge drive to be inclusive and accessible, and that drives down into your tools that are available as well in your Office 365. So what does that mean? That means that I'm going to have inclusive reader in my PowerPoints and in my OneNote. And so maybe if I have a hard time reading things off the screen, right, I can do the immersive reader and it's going to read the captions back to me. Or I can use OneNote and maybe I have a hard time typing things out. I can use the voice to text to be able to have, to have all my notes taken. Honestly, I could probably even be running OneNote while I'm in my class and while I'm in lecture and being able to record all of my lectures as well and being able to have that voice to text for my lecture notes. So, another really, really great experience for your students and being able to provide them things like Excel, Office, PowerPoint, Outlook, right? The main drivers that they're going to have to be able to use in a real world environment as well. So not only are you giving them the tools to better learn, but you're also giving them the skill sets that are going to make them a better employee in the future as well. So there's my scenario about John and how the Microsoft ecosystem can improve his experience in a higher education as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think, just to take a second and summarize like the three scenarios we talked about, right? We talked about the scenario from a finance perspective. We talked about scenario from John, who's the president. And now here's the student. And what's crazy is I think that at the end of the day, automation is what I think can take education institutions to new levels of digital transformation. I mean, I know it sounds corny. I know it sounds played out. Even you hear it all the time. But from things like mobile engagement, workflow management, you really want to free your staff members from like redundant, time-intensive tasks, and when you leverage these systems and surface to them in real time, the like built-in intelligence workflows and the AI and all the amazing kind of connectivity and the productivity aspects of the solution, it does help boost employee productivity. It's going to help reduce human error. And at the end of the day, it's going to optimize the student experience, right? And that same system that the staff is using is what ultimately the students engage with as well. And so overall, I get this feeling of there's a huge gains that can be made just by a little bit of standardization, a little bit of implementation technology. And I think universities and colleges are really prime to kind of get some huge gains in this respect. And actually, if you go to the next slide, I want to take a second and even talk about some of the case studies that have been put out there. And I won't bottom all these out, but what I will say though is that a lot of the trends that we talked about for the Canadian universities are things that Microsoft has already done for other universities. So for example, at University of South Florida, their vision was to build one university with multiple campuses. It doesn't matter where you are, the experience you have should be seamless. And that's basically the scenario that Mary just talked about with John, right? No matter who I'm working with, the registrar's office, admissions, the way I interact with the school should be absolutely the same. Again, I'm not gonna bottom all these out, but pretty incredible to kind of see the gains and the benefits and the objectives that a lot of these universities have again achieved through the D365 platform. And ultimately, again, tying back to all the themes we talked about, right? Building scalability, enhancing the reputation, building greater assurance in terms of the services that these universities deliver. So if you go to the next slide here, I think we're going to take a second and hand it up to Marty. And maybe kind of tee it up for a second. Look, at the end of the day, to implement a lot of this stuff, it does take effort. It does take a lot of smart people kind of getting together and figuring things out. And I think if you feel there's value here for your organization, what we basically want to share with you is an opportunity for Microsoft to sponsor a workshop called the Business Value Assessment. And Marty's going to talk about here more in just a second, and then we'll close. Marty, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamal. And I think as we think about the use cases and some of the themes and outcomes that we've discussed and how to use these technologies, I mean, it can be very daunting staring down some of these outcomes that you're looking at achieving and driving automation and to Jamal's point, we can help you through that process with the business value session and really an envisioning session. And so we can help facilitate a workshop as you think through the pressing business issues that you have. And again, whether they're aligned to the ones in the presentation that we have today, or there are others, we can help you think through those, prioritize them. And we use design thinking techniques, and we partner with Microsoft on this using a methodology to take you through this business value assessment. And again, we go from the very large world of the possible and help you really narrow into those most, again, important and pressing business issues that you would want to solve. And how can we start to layer on the solutions and design those solutions to help you address those outcomes. And again, whether it's a very large transformational initiative, or you're starting small with a few key process automations that will help you, again, move the needle and continue to help you drive momentum. So, and coming out of that will help you develop a high-level practical roadmap so that, again, it's something real. We can walk out of there with some clear next steps and help you begin executing against your vision, right? So again, whether it's a very large transformative project or that smaller process automation, we can help you, again, go through this session, narrow things down, help get to a solution, and help drive out a roadmap to help you start marching towards your outcomes. So again, please reach out if you're interested in this. Again, as Jamal noted, we can work through Microsoft on sponsoring a program like this and having us go through this on a complimentary basis to help you start your digital transformation journey. So I think I'm going to hand it back to Nadim to just close us out here, and thanks everybody for your time. Nadim.
Perfect. Thanks, Marty. I guess I'll first start off by just sincerely thanking the presenters. There's a lot that happened in the back end, and there's some juggling that happened, but we made it through. So really thanks to Jamal and Mary and Marty for kind of lining this up and making this presentation. The second thing I want to say is, hey, maybe just welcome to the new Microsoft. I think if this was 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't have heard us talking about things such as student experience at a university or at a higher ed institution. It was more about kind of productivity with Office and etc. And so I think the goal, and as you probably heard a lot about Microsoft and Dynamics and etc. throughout this presentation, and the intention was not to that we're trying to sell you Dynamics. I think the intention is to say, look, Microsoft is, with our partner community, we're here to be a transformational partner with you. And we believe today we have the solutions to help you kind of think through that process, because every organization at some level is doing it. And this may not have been what you may have been used to for Microsoft before. So it was really important for us to kind of talk to you about, hey, we understand what everyone is facing today. We understand what your industry is facing today. And we hopefully that some of these messages that we've landed today really resonate with you guys, and understanding that we do understand that it does take a lot of energy and a lot of time and resources to think about how to remap technology, but I can promise, because I'm living proof of living in a world of legacy and moving to the cloud, right? And not just cloud, but transforming business processes, making things more efficient, making employees more strategic in nature, empowering the employees. So there's so many derived benefits from the transformation that the journey, while hard, the end result is super great. And so I would really invite you to think about taking advantage of that offer that Marty presented. And so with that, I know we're at the top of the hour. I really do appreciate you being on the call. Last thing I'm going to ask for those that were able to stick around is we do have a survey. Jamal's going to pop it into the chat. We really, really would like if you could please fill out that survey. Also, let us know if you're interested in perhaps the the envisioning workshop as Marty presented. And you know, I think there will be a drawing. Jamal said that he has a $20 gift card for anyone that does fill the survey. So please, if you can, we really appreciate it. It will help us with that. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day, and look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.